Welcome to In the Trenches, where entrepreneurs, artists, writers, designers, inventors, warriors, and leaders share their stories of doing the hard, creative work that impacts all of our lives. Let the journey inspire you to do something worthwhile, build something bold, and create your life's work. And now, your host, Tom Morkis.
Welcome back, everyone, to another broadcast of In the Trenches. I'm very excited to have on the show today Carrie Dils, who is a WordPress developer and consultant, host of the Office Hours FM podcast, and author of Real World Freelancing, the No-Bull Survival Guide, which we'll be talking about a little bit today. So, Carrie, thank you so much for being on In the Trenches with us.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So, before we get to the book and to the podcast and everything else that you do, tell me a little bit about how you got started in WordPress and developing and now kind of working as a consultant in that space.
Sure. So the condensed version is I started doing freelance client work as soon as I graduated from college. This was in the late 90s. And I've always kept a toe in the freelance web development waters since then. Even though, I mean, my career's had some twists and turns, but the recurring theme is going back to doing my own thing, serving clients with technology. And like I said, about 5 years ago, I discovered WordPress through a colleague. And once I found that and found out the power of what it could do, just out of the box, I was sold. So yeah, from there in the past 4 or 5 years, I've been doing client work, consulting, development, not so much design, but really with the intent of producing websites that help clients build their business. So not just, hey, here I am, but actually a website that somehow serves to either generate revenue or visibility for their businesses.
I love it. Fantastic. So that's how you got started. Tell me a little bit about kind of building your platform and kind of, there's a lot of developers out there, but not everybody does, builds out a website. What was the purpose behind that? What was the purpose behind starting a podcast?
Sure. So I can't not have a website if that's what I do for other people. So, initially the site just started off as a kind of a portfolio to demonstrate, how I could help folks. And then over time, I started blogging, a lot of kind of informational tutorial how-to sort of stuff. And the podcast was actually kind of born out of that, just broadcasting information, trying to be helpful. As I learned something, I would blog about it, talk about it on the podcast, and I got good feedback. So the more feedback I got, the the more it made me want to carry on. And it's kind of funny though, the folks that attracted, that audience were ultimately not the audience that I was selling to. And that was sort of a strange realization to make.
Okay, great. Well, so now talk to me a little bit about the new book, Real World Freelancing. Like, where did this come from? What's the point of it? And what will the reader get from it?
Sure. And appreciate you giving me the opportunity to chat about it a little bit. So having done freelancing for so long, there are so many things I've done absolutely wrong and just mistakes and things I wish I'd known along the way, but you don't know unless somebody either tells you or you just trip and fall and learn the hard way. So the book, and I'm actually co-writing it with a colleague. Her name is Diane Kinney. She's also been in the consulting and freelance world for a long time. And really the book is like, if we could go back and mentor our younger selves and say, here's the route to go, here's the things to avoid. That's what the book was kind of born out of. And then in terms of the real world part, that's where, we're both kind of down to earth, no BS people. That's the way we communicate. And I think that what I've seen so much of in the online, I want to give you advice about how to run your business space, are a lot of pie in the sky kinds of things. And not that some of those things don't work, but that's just not reality for a lot of people. Like if I'm sitting at my kitchen table trying to find a client to, get a website project so that I can pay my rent, that's a very long way from, someone teaching you how to, launch your $100,000 product in the next 4 weeks. There's just some disconnect there. So the real world freelancing part was, here's the real deal. We're not going to BS you or fluff up and make it all sound wonderful. It can be wonderful, but there are just realities that I don't think are necessarily expressed when people are other folks are always putting their best foot forward online. And there's not always a best foot to put forward. Hey, that sounded kind of negative. I didn't.
No worries. So I want to roll with that though.
Away, but...
Like if you can, give me some examples of what you might consider like that idea of being vague or general or mostly just like idealistic type thinking versus your book, what makes it more practical. Give me, if you could juxtapose that and then dig into, your thoughts on, and it can be on any one of these aspects that you cover in your book, from business fundamentals to, to selling, to marketing and all that.
So a book that I actually really love it, but it's The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. It's been out for, I don't know, maybe 15 years and I read it and I was like, well, heck yes, I want a 4-hour work week. I mean, who doesn't want a 4-hour work week? And he laid out some really interesting things that some good principles, even if they don't translate into a 4-hour work week. But the reality is most people are not going to step into a 4-hour work week anytime soon. Again, not discounting the book because there are some fantastic takeaways in there. But for real world freelancing, it's going to be very practical guides. So for instance, we have a section chapter on working with clients and writing proposals and scoping projects. Then we'll also provide a set of templates with the book for, hey, this is what a proposal, a well-rounded proposal could look like. These are some tools to help you with project discovery, things that are meant to, hoping that the reader gets out pen and paper or keyboard and a text editor to interact with what they're learning versus just read it, put it down and forget it.
So walk me through that. Let's actually take maybe a deep dive look at this. What do you think are the things that most freelancers get wrong that they could improve like overnight or at least pretty rapidly if they just did it a different way?
Yeah. The biggest one that I think I've learned is communication. Communication on the surface is not very difficult. As a matter of fact, it seems like, of course, you would communicate with your client about your availability or a timeline or the cost of a project, or there's nothing strange sounding about that. But I think that, I remember many times, like just kind of failure to state the obvious. So things like when you're starting off in a project, like this is going to be the payment terms. These are going to be the milestones when we touch base and we're delivering things. This is how I need communication to happen. Like if I'm needing materials or artwork or something from you, my expectation is that, we'll chat within the next, or you'll have that to me within the next 48 hours. You have the same expectation of me that I will be on the other end of the email or the phone. Or if you don't get on the phone, then state that. Say, I prefer all my communication to go through Basecamp or Trello or email or whatever it is. But I've learned that you can over communication it's really hard to do. Like always err on the side of communicating entirely too much information. And when we're talking about how can somebody take that overnight and or immediately digest that into their business, I would say if there is any ambiguity on any project right now in terms of moving forward or in terms of someone owing you information or cash or whatever it is, get on the phone. Like no text messages, no vague emails, or even or clear emails. Like if you need something from someone, just pick up the good old fashioned phone and have a call, because I think that things are things can be lost in translation when you don't hear the tone in somebody's voice. Um, and so, anyways, that was maybe a little bit soapboxy, but getting on the phone with clients would be one, and that can immediately be put into practice. And then the other one is when you're scoping projects, which I mean, I could talk for days about that, Tom, and probably glaze all your listeners' ears over or eyes over. So I won't do that, but be as clear as possible about what it is that you're delivering, and also be clear about what you're not delivering. Because I think there's it's really easy for us or for me as a technical person to think I'm hearing and understanding correctly what a client wants. And then sometimes due to my failure to actually map out what it was I was going to deliver, I get it wrong. And maybe they expected things that I had no intention of ever delivering, and therefore those things weren't included in the cost, and then they get unhappy. Yeah, so communicate.
Do you do any type of like road mapping before, a project?
Absolutely.
And how do you do that? Like, do you charge for that? Is that just part of the, what's your process for actually getting, onboarding new clients, so to speak?
So I have moved to a paid discovery process. And what that entails, again, this goes back to the scale of a project, but taking some amount of time, whether that's 2 hours or whether it's 2 weeks, whatever it is, to just not talk about what technology you're going to use to implement a solution, none of that, but just talk and understand exactly what the client is asking for, and then challenging them back or not challenging them back, but really getting to the root of if what they're asking for is really what they need. So understanding the business decision behind what they're asking you for. If it's like, say, a website that does X, Y, or Z, do they really need X, Y, or Z, or does it turn out they're trying to solve problem A? Well, you can only find that out if you're asking lots of questions and spending the time to do that. And then from those conversations, creating what you say, a roadmap. So these are going to be, we're going to ballpark the scale of this project and what makes sense to deliver in this first chunk, and what make more sense to maybe put off into a secondary phase or a secondary project, whatnot. The roadmap different people have different styles. Like the roadmap could be one single document, or the roadmap could be called your statement of work. It could also actually include your terms and your proposal and end up being the signed contract. Again, preference mileage may vary, but I'm such a huge proponent of that roadmap. And again, let's say you're working on somebody just comes to you and needs a little fix, and it's something that's going to take you less than 5 hours to do. Well, clearly in that case, you don't need them to pay for a road mapping session. That's silly. So based on the size of the project and the scale of the project, you can scale up or scale down what that road mapping looks like. But oh my gosh, projects go so much more smoothly if you take that time up front.
What would you say is the point at which, depending on, I guess, the size of the contract, the price of it, when a freelancer should, I guess I'm curious about this. So let me see if I can actually phrase this the right way. Like, I feel like when you're doing like like a 5-hour project or something like that, I don't know, depending on what market you're in, I'm not sure how much you could charge for something, if it's very, very small like that. So if you work on bigger projects traditionally, at what point does it make sense to kind of do something like go through a proposal route, or does it make sense to have some sort of productized service? Like if you're doing like lower end or less expensive type projects, like where's that happy, medium, or that happy place where somebody can kind of say, yeah, because I'm doing like this very expensive projects that, the onboarding process or lining up new clients takes a while, but that's all we do are these bigger projects, or versus maybe like doing something more productized and it being cheaper. And maybe maybe productization has nothing to do with actually being cheaper. But I'm just curious, do you kind of get what I'm saying here, or is that a little confusing?
Yeah, I think so. So in web development, it's very hard to productize what ultimately for most projects ends up being a very custom, tailor-fitted solution. Now you could say, okay, for X amount of dollars, I'm going to take this stock theme and I'm going to create these 5 pages, an about page, a contact page, but et cetera. And you're going to provide the content, and I'll pop in that content and add the photos you send me, and that's that's $500 or whatever. And in that case, no, there is no road mapping. There's no consulting. You're executing, right? Versus a project where you really are coming in as a business partner, a consultant, versus just a vendor that can execute a set of requirements. That's when I think that road mapping comes into play. And if you're if you're a freelancer that works as a subcontractor, for instance. Tom, let's say that you went out and sold a web project, and I'm going to be your developer on it. Then you would go and do all that discovery and figure out what all the requirements were. And then you would hand me a set of specs. So I didn't really go through that process. You did. So depending on, I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but the productizing thing is where I could see that working in the web field would be if you're talking about like support and maintenance, like, hey, for $100 a month, I'm going to, make sure all your software is updated and backed up. And if you have, 1 or 2, 3, 4 small tasks, those are included or something like that.
Awesome. Yeah, I was kind of curious specifically in regards to like, because I think the idea of like productization is compelling, but in the end, like, if something's working, it's working. So like I traditionally work on pretty large scale projects that I'm not quite sure exactly how I would honestly even productize. So I was always like curious about like how people go into that process, like, and where it's worthwhile to like go and sit down and create like a unique proposal for every client. Because of course that's going to take more time. And if it makes sense to figure out a way to productize. So yeah, I think that answers the question. I don't know if you have any thoughts after me kind of trying to clarify that there.
Yeah, I would say, so when I think about productization, I look at, how much of this process is standardized and follows the exact same set of, to-do lists or whatever. And where there's, I'm going to make up a number here, but where there's, let's say 90% of a project is going to require all of those steps, then that's something that could be productized. If it's a custom work, that would be much harder to productize. However, there may still be some of those steps that are going to be the same regardless. For instance, your proposal language, the way that you onboard clients, whether it's a series of emails or whatever documents you use, how you set up payment terms, like those are all things that are pretty static. So certainly having processes in place that you can use on project after project helps speed, make you much more efficient. So maybe it's productizing like in your mind and not not in the way you sell it, but in the way you're creating processes around what you're doing.
What's the best way for freelancers to actually raise their prices?
Oh, well, there's so many directions you could go with that question. I think one, you have to believe that you're worth a price. So there's, I think, a self-confidence issue there. Two, you need to be worth the price. So, if you're a junior level developer, you're probably not going to charge $200 an hour just because you can. And then third, well, this goes back to the communication. If you're going to raise your price on existing clients, never do it midstream, mid-project. And then at the end of a project, communicate, hey, moving forward, these are going to be my new rates, da 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 da. And then also, I guess a fourth thing, I don't know that any of these flow flow exactly together, but when it comes to raising rates, there's a threshold at which people will tell you you're too expensive. If nobody tells you you're too expensive right now, then you're too cheap. Now, if everybody tells you you're too expensive and you're not getting any business, then, come back up down off of that price. But there should always be some people that cannot afford your services. And, I would encourage people to don't be afraid to experiment with that number, because it is something that you kind of have to figure out exactly what works for you and for your target audience. But as a general rule of thumb, know that you're worth it. Provide whatever product or service that delivers the value of what you're charging. Communicate that well to your customers, and play with your pricing to reach the optimal dollar amount.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, I love it. So we're coming up to the top of the interview, Carrie. I'm curious, where can people read more about you, learn more about you, and find out what you're working on?
Sure. So sort of the hub of all activity is over at carriedils.com. I'd also, for anyone interested in the book, you can go to realworldfreelancing.com, and we have an overview of kind of some of the things that are going to be included in the book. And it's not available yet, but there's people can sign up, give their email address, and we'll let them know as soon as it is. And then for social media, I mostly hang out on Twitter at @CDils.
I love it, Carrie. Well, thank you so much for being on In the Trenches. Had a blast talking, and I look forward to picking up your book when it goes live.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it.
All right, Carrie, take care.
Thank you for listening to In the Trenches. Your creative work doesn't stop here. Join the resistance, the small but growing army of entrepreneurs and artists putting a dent in the world at www.tommorkes.com. Never fight alone. Join the resistance.